Welcome to Health 2660. Here we don't just talk about health, we tell the stories that heal. Now please listen to the story. The itch started small, a niggling dryness that Walter Jenkins, at 72, initially dismissed as the desert air of his retirement town. He'd traded the roaring sirens and acrid smoke of his firefighting days for pastel sunsets and the whisper of wind through palm trees, believing he'd earned a peaceful denouement. But peace, he was discovering, was a trickier beast than a five-alarm blaze. This itch, seemingly innocuous, became a relentless campaign, a slow burn that threatened to consume him. It began around his groin, an area he'd always considered private resilient. He remembered scaling ladders in full gear, the heat searing his skin, yet he'd always bounced back. Now, a simple itch was his nemesis. Creams promised relief, their oily textures offering fleeting comfort before the inferno returned. Powders caked and clumped, creating a sticky mess that only exacerbated the irritation. Soap-free washes, recommended by a pharmacist young enough to be his grandson, left his skin feeling tight and vulnerable. He felt like a rusty engine, sputtering and wheezing, despite all the modern lubricants. The nights were the worst. Sleep once a sanctuary became a battlefield. He'd toss and turn scratching with a ferocity that left his skin raw and bleeding. Marlene, his wife of 50 years, would stir beside him, her hand reaching out tentatively before retreating into the safety of her own space. The distance grew a chasm carved not by anger or resentment, but by an ailment he couldn't even name with certainty. It wasn't just the physical discomfort. It was the shame, the feeling of being unclean, of being somehow broken. He felt his masculinity, his hard-earned virility, slowly eroding. He avoided her touch, fearing he'd contaminate her with his unseen plague. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air, thicker than the humidity before a summer storm. He was becoming a ghost in his own home, a shadow of the man who'd once carried children from burning buildings, the man who'd held Marlene close through grief and joy. He saw the worry etched on her face, the question in her eyes. She'd suggest doctor-specialist experimental treatments, but Walter resisted. He was a man of action, not a patient. He was used to fixing things not being fixed. Admitting defeat felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. The morning that changed everything dawned gray and oppressive. Walter stood before the bathroom mirror, his reflection a stark reminder of his decline. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt. The red, angry rash around his groin pulsed with a malevolent energy. A fresh canker sore throbbed beneath his tongue, making even the thought of coffee repulsive. He felt old, used up, discarded. "Is this what the rest of my life looks like?" he whispered to the haggard face staring back at him. The question hung in the air, unanswered, mocking. That's when he made the call. To Richard. Dr. Richard Epstein, his old friend, the firehouse doctor, the man who'd patched him up after countless close calls. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Richard had retired to a small farm, upstate trading stethoscopes for chickens. Calling him felt like admitting weakness, like surrendering to the indignities of age. But Walter was desperate. He needed answers, a lifeline in this sea of discomfort. Richard listened patiently as Walter described his symptoms, his voice cracking with frustration and exhaustion. There was a long pause, punctuated only by the static on the phone line. Then Richard chuckled, a low rumbling sound that Walter hadn't heard in decades. "Walter, do you still keep baking soda in your kitchen?" Walter blinked, confused. "Of course," he replied, his voice laced with suspicion, next to the salt. "Why, good Richard?" said his voice, regaining its usual calm authority. "Because that little orange box might be the cheapest health revolution you've never tried." Walter stared at the phone, dumbfounded. "You're joking, right? Nope," Richard said firmly. "Try it tonight. Warm bath, half a cup of baking soda. Soak for 20 minutes. We'll talk in a week." He gave Walter a few more instructions: a dilute solution of baking soda in water as a mouthwash, another for his dentures, and a small amount taken internally after meals. Then, with a final word of encouragement, he hung up. Walter felt a surge of disbelief, tinged with a flicker of hope. Baking soda. For all this, it seemed absurd, almost insulting. He'd faced down, infernos climbed burning buildings, and now he was supposed to believe that a common household item could alleviate his suffering. But he was out of options. Desperation trumped skepticism. That evening, he ran a warm bath, the water swirling around him like a soothing embrace. He measured out half a cup of baking soda, the fine white powder cascading into the water, creating a milky cloud. As he lowered himself into the tub, he felt foolish, almost pathetic. Here he was, a decorated firefighter, soaking in a baking soda bath like some old lady. But then something shifted. The itch, that constant nagging presence, began to subside. The redness around his groin seemed to soften, the burning sensation to fade. His skin felt calmer. He closed his eyes, letting the warm water and the subtle alkaline solution work their magic. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of peace. He slept through the night. No scratching, no tossing. Just deep, restorative sleep. He woke up groggy, but not with the usual exhaustion. This was the grogginess of true rest of a body finally allowed to heal. The next morning brought another surprise. As he swung his legs out of bed, his feet didn't scream in protest. He looked down, expecting to see the usual swollen, inflamed joints. But they were normal. Less swelling, less stiffness. He stood up and walked around the room, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was manageable. He could walk without wincing. He also noticed something else. The strange odor that had begun to emanate from his body, a musky, unpleasant scent that had embarrassed him, was gone. He smelled clean. He soaked his feet again that afternoon, a small basin of warm water, and a couple of tablespoons of baking soda. It felt like a quiet return to himself, a small, almost sacred ritual of self-respect. He added a pinch to his denture cleaner, and they felt fresher, cleaner. The next day, he ventured further, following Richard's instructions to the letter. Half a teaspoon of baking soda in a glass of water after lunch. He braced himself for the usual heartburn, the acid reflux that had plagued him for years. But it never came. No bloat. No tight burning feeling rising into his chest. Just relief. He felt lighter, more comfortable. He couldn't believe it. Was this actually working? Could something so simple, so readily available, actually be making a difference? He felt a surge of cautious optimism, a flicker of hope in the darkness. By the end of the week, Walter was a different man. He cleaned his dentures in a mild baking soda rinse. No more sour taste. His mouth felt clean, fresh. Marlene kissed him without hesitation that night, and he kissed her back, fully present, savoring the moment, the connection, the renewed intimacy. When his urination discomfort flared up 2 days later, the familiar burning sensation and the constant urge to go, he tried the same trick. Half a teaspoon of baking soda in water, twice a day. By the third day, the burning sensation was nearly gone. He didn't feel the need to hover by the bathroom door anymore. He slept through the night without the constant pressure in his bladder. Even a mild gout flare, something that had crippled him last winter, eased faster than usual. The sharp pain in his toe dulled after 2 days of his new habit. He could walk without a cane, without the agonizing throbbing that had confined him to his armchair for weeks. Walter was beginning to believe. The evidence was undeniable. He was feeling better, stronger, more like himself. He was reclaiming his body, his health, his life. But healing is never a straight path. There are setbacks, detours, moments of doubt. 1 week later, Walter skipped his baking soda routine. Life got busy. His brother Tom visited from out of town. They grilled steaks, stayed up late, watching baseball, shared old stories, and drank a few too many beers. He forgot all about his new regimen. By the next morning, the itch returned. His feet ached. His stomach burned. He felt groggy again, his head pounding with a dull throb. He felt like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Walter stared at the neglected orange box on the counter, a silent accusation in its familiar design. It wasn't magic, he realized. It wasn't a miracle cure. It was consistency, intention. It was about paying attention to his body, listening to its needs, and responding with kindness and care. He wasn't broken. He just needed support. And it was sitting in his kitchen all along, waiting to be used. So Walter started again. This time with purpose. A baking soda bath twice a week. A foot soak every Sunday morning. A warm rinse for his dentures after every meal. Half a teaspoon in water after heavy meals or on days when his joints felt tight. He even swished it in his mouth when a new canker sore showed up, and it healed in half the time. He became an advocate for his own health, a proactive participant in his well-being. He researched the science behind baking soda, learning about its alkaline properties, its ability to neutralize acids, its potential to reduce inflammation. He wasn't just blindly following Richard's advice. He was understanding why it worked. But the most profound change wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Walter began to carry himself differently. He walked straighter, his shoulders back, his head held high. He slept deeper, his nightmares fading into distant memories. He laughed more freely, his voice resonating with genuine joy. He even signed up to volunteer at the local firehouse again, not to work, not to fight fires, but to teach the new recruits. To pass down the stories, the lessons learned, the camaraderie forged in the heat of battle. To stay engaged, to feel useful, to be a part of something bigger than himself. One morning, sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, Marlene brought him his tea. She sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his arm. "You seem lighter," she said, her eyes filled with warmth. "You're different." Walter smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "I feel like myself again," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. And it wasn't some fancy treatment, some miracle drug. Just baking soda and a little attention. He paused, reflecting on the journey he'd taken. Funny how the simplest things bring us back. That afternoon, he wrote a letter to his grandson Jake, who was studying holistic medicine at a university in Oregon. He titled it, "Don't Overlook the Ordinary." In it, he shared what he'd learned, the wisdom he'd gained through his experience. How a few cents worth of powder had helped him reclaim his comfort, his sleep, his joy. Not a miracle, he emphasized, just a tool. One that honored his body's quiet requests for care. He wrote about the importance of listening to your body, of being proactive about your health, of not dismissing simple remedies as being ineffective. He urged Jake to remember the power of the ordinary, the potential for healing that lies hidden in plain sight. He never claimed to have a cure-all. He never promised miracles. He simply shared his experience, his journey, his newfound appreciation for the power of the ordinary. He reminded people that healing is a process, not an event, and that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. He never forgot the lessons he'd learned, the importance of listening to his body, of seeking out simple solutions, of not overlooking the ordinary. He continued to share his story, inspiring others to take control of their health and to embrace the power of self-care. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Marlene watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, he reflected on his life, the challenges he'd faced, the lessons he'd learned. He realized that aging wasn't about decline and decay, but about growth and wisdom. It was about appreciating the simple things, about cherishing the moments, about finding joy in the ordinary. He reached for Marlene's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. He looked into her eyes, his heart filled with love and gratitude. He knew that he was blessed not just with good health, but with a loving wife, a supportive family, and a life filled with purpose. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the fresh desert air. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of contentment, a sense of wholeness. He knew that he had found his peace not in retirement, not in the absence of sirens and smoke, but in the simple act of caring for himself, of honoring his body, and of embracing the power of the ordinary. And as he sat there, hand in hand with Marlene, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he couldn't help but wonder if baking soda, a humble household ingredient, could unlock such profound healing. What other simple, overlooked solutions were waiting to be discovered? What other secrets lay hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed? The possibilities, he realized, were endless. But what about the specific concentrations and durations? Were his applications of baking soda optimal? Or could they be refined further to unlock even greater potential? What were the long-term effects of his routine? And what cautionary measures should others consider before adopting his methods? Health 2660. Thanks you for listening. We'll see you in the next video, and until then, be kind to yourself.